are talking a most atrocious thing. This is directed by Christian Hurley and Ben Oliphint, who also co-wrote the movie and have roles in the movie as well. Now, when I first saw the poster of this, for some reason I thought it was going to be somewhat of a serious horror movie. It totally isn't. This is very much a horror comedy. And it focuses on a group of male friends slash lovers who go to a cabin in the woods for a retreat. And there's two other guys that are kind of late and in a car that are kind of having a separate adventure, so to speak. And this particular wooded area is home to a lot of deer. But this deer seems to be drinking from this stream, which has been contaminated by some type of chemical leak and has turned the deer into effectively monsters. They go hunting one day, kill a deer, unknowingly eat it, and thus turning some of these guys into zombies, ultimately. So this is very much a movie which will remind you of the film Cabin Fever in regards to kind of plot, but it has influences clearly from the likes of the Evil Dead. So there's some stylistic choice here. Things like the sound effects, the camera, but some of the VFX will remind you of elements of the Evil Dead series, but as I say, more of the style of plot in regards to Cabin Fever. So there you go. What do we think works in this movie's favour? Well, here's the incredible thing about this film, is this was apparently, from what I understand, made for just $5,000. And let me tell you, this movie does not look in many ways like it was made for such a small amount of money. Having done this channel for a long time and reviewed a lot of B movies, I know a lot of the budgets of these films, and $5,000 or pounds doesn't get you much, and a lot of the films that I review here are for that budget. But this film, I have to say, is filmed and produced so well considering such a small budget. You would think this would be at least a $30,000 to $40,000 budget movie, because it's very well produced considering such a tiny budget. And I have to say as well, I think the acting is fairly strong. It's the comedic roles. I mean, these characters aren't exactly going for Oscar bait here, but nonetheless, I think the actors are probably playing somewhat versions of themselves. But nonetheless, I gotta say, I think the characters were convincing in the kind of like the goofy roles that they sometimes are. But nonetheless, I think they were perfectly fine with that kind of that tone and the kind of the level of movie that this is going for. So that was absolutely fine. There's some pretty decent kind of gore shots in here, and a variety of like gross out effects, including like disgusting puke sequences and things like that. The VFX on these kind of rotting flesh and zombie-like kind of appearances I thought was all done pretty well. The movie is quite well paced, and being a horror comedy, there's a few kind of funny moments in the movie, kind of jokes and things like that, some kind of amusing sequences, and there are some artistic flourishes as well. There's a lot of drug humour in this movie, and a lot of these kind of sequences are designed to kind of give you the impression of someone being like stoned and stuff. So there's kind of somewhat some surreal sort of sequences as well. So it very much feels like, as I say, a culmination of the Evil Dead's kind of the Evil Dead style, with more of the kind of the plot from Cabin Fever, but it makes it for a kind of somewhat fun movie that potentially has an ecological message as well. Obviously pollution and that sort of thing, with some kind of fun protagonists, these kind of killer deer and stuff like that, and variety of sort of zombie-like menaces as well. So yeah, overall it definitely has somewhat of a kind of a fun factor. Let's transition to now what doesn't work. There's one area where this movie does fall down in regards to the budget, and that is the actual deer itself. This kind of mutant deer. Now, it literally looks like a Muppet. I was kind of expecting Kermit the Frog to pop up in this movie. I suspect it's done partially because they maybe couldn't afford to do a genuinely kind of scary creature, so they thought they would lean into the comedy and make it kind of goofy looking. But I don't know, that's my speculation. I mean, it feels to me like it was a choice rather than it just wasn't done very well, because some of the other kind of the prosthetics, I say, were done well. But it's a little too goofy, in my opinion, even for a kind of joke, because this isn't like a spoof movie. You know, we're meant to kind of go on with these characters like they're kind of real people, so to speak. It's not like Scary Movie or something like that, where it is an out-and-out spoof. But this kind of deer monster kind of looks like it should come out of Scary Movie, because it's so silly, so goofy. So there is that, and it gets a reasonable amount of screen time. Let me just tell you, it's not just a couple of scenes. So I think they went too far in the comedy area in that one. And the other thing is, the other issue I would have with this really is the kind of the humour here is very much stoner humour, and kind of like that sort of bro dude kind of style of sort of characters. And people can be a little bit hit and miss with kind of the stoner humour, and they do lean into it a little bit, again, a little bit too much. There's certain sort of sequences here where it ultimately makes the characters seem massively selfish and self-centered. And we get them to be sort of high and what have you, but for example, we see, we're meant to believe this is a group of friends, and you know, one of them, the first one, dies, and there are certain characters here that just seem unfazed by it and kind of almost make a joke out of it, and in turn it makes the sympathy for the characters that you're meant to be watching somewhat fizzle. And one of the whole conceits here is this group of friends that are very tight, and one of them's upset that one's kept a secret from another and things like this. So, you know, there is that. It's interesting that there's really no female characters in this movie. Maybe it could have had a couple of female characters, who knows, but yeah, but there is that element there that I feel if you're wanting to watch this as a female, you may feel, well, you know, it's just a bunch of guys. So there is that. Ultimately, it's a fun movie, but it is kind of reminiscent of stuff you have seen before. Ultimately, you could argue to say that this is a movie made for horror fans, and they'll be recognising, oh, I recognise that influence, I recognise that reference. But ultimately, what it does mean is the movie ends up lacking a little bit of its own identity, because it's so reliant on things that have come before it, so to speak, outside of a very goofy monster. So this is really Attack of the Muppet Reindeer in a movie which is not that silly around it. So it's a fun movie, and very, very impressive in regards to the technical elements outside of that one puppet. Very, you know, very hard to do, to make a movie this slick looking for such a small amount of money. So I certainly will give the movie some props for that. So yeah, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's a fun movie, although it doesn't really ultimately become that memorable at the end of the day. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please do leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.